Xena Warrior Princess is a story of redemption, defying the gods, and a certain subtext. Xena began her journey of redemption in the land of Amazons and centaurs and traveled throughout the ancient world. As Xena's legends swept through this fictional world, so too did the TV series sweep across the real world, becoming one of the biggest syndicated TV hits of the 1990s. A rare example of a spin-off superseding its predecessor in popularity, Xena has endured thanks due to a passionate fan base and the powerful story of an outsider trying to do good in the world. Xena's story has a lot of different beginnings, but the one I want to start with is in 1981 with the cult horror classic The Evil Dead. Famously written and directed by Sam Raimi, it starred Bruce Campbell and was produced by Rob Tapert. To create this movie, the three men formed the production company Renaissance Pictures. And of the three of them, Rob Tapert will figure most prominently in this story. Renaissance Pictures would produce several movies, including the next movies in the Evil Dead trilogy, Hard Target, and the Darkman movies. Although it had primarily focused on theatrical productions, in 1994 they partnered with Universal Television as part of their Action Pack. Action Pack was a 2-hour programming block sold in syndication. For those unfamiliar with syndication, as a brief lesson, it's when the owners of a television program sell the rights to that program to local TV stations instead of going through a network. This means that syndicated shows are typically purchased by TV stations to fill in various gaps in their programming schedule. Whereas network shows will have a set primetime lineup, these syndicated shows would go wherever TV stations needed them to be within their weekly schedule. Instead of selecting a slate of shows to fill up the programming block right out of the gate, Universal decided to experiment. With 5 different pitches for ongoing series in hand, they would create multiple movies for each of those potential series and decide which ones would go forward based on the performance of those movies. The titles presented were Tech War, Midnight Run, based on the 1988 movie, Bandit, a Smokey and the Bandit spinoff, Vanishing Son, and most importantly, Hercules. The various potential franchises were produced by different companies, but Renaissance Pictures would be working on the Hercules movies. In total, 5 were produced: Hercules and the Amazon Women, Hercules and the Lost Kingdom, Hercules and the Circle of Fire, Hercules in the Underworld, and Hercules in the Maze of the Minotaur. The first of these movies, Hercules and the Amazon Women, would air in April of 1994.
This is the story of a time long ago.
Starring Kevin Sorbo, in this adventure, Hercules helps a village of men who are being attacked by the Amazons. This movie would establish many of the basics of this fictional world, using lots of action and sex mixed with modern dialogue and flashy special effects. Well, flashy for the time. Hercules and the Amazon Women was a break from older concepts at Greek mythology. There were less togas and bad accents, and more social commentary fresh from the 90s.
My father used to chase my mother with one of these. No one chases me.
The appeal to audiences of the 90s carries with it concerns over feminism and other topical issues we'll see manifest throughout Xena's run as well, albeit through the medium of Greek mythology and with a healthy dose of ass-kicking and sexy people to keep viewers engaged. One very striking part of these movies is the gorgeous landscapes. The idea of shooting in New Zealand came from producer Eric Grundemann, who had been tasked with finding some place in the world that had lovely visuals that could pass for ancient Greece, while still being affordable. He had seen clips of the country on an episode of Good Morning America and was very taken with them. He had struggled to find solid details on the status of film production in New Zealand, so he went down there to investigate personally. In an interview, he remarked, "I came down here, fell in love with the country and the people, then went to work flying back to Los Angeles to try and convince everybody to make it in New Zealand. Once I showed them the pictures and showed them the numbers, they said, it seems to be the place to go. Let's do it." The movie's cast was filled out with Roma Downey as the Amazon Queen Hippolyta and Anthony Quinn as Zeus. Some of the other roles were sourced locally. Diana Rowan, who was casting in New Zealand, suggested Michael Hurst as Hercules' buddy Aeolus. He would be playing Aeolus for many years to come and would go on to direct several episodes of Xena Warrior Princess. And most importantly for fans of the Xenaverse was the casting of Lucy Lawless. She would be Hippolyta's right-hand woman, Lycia.
No, stop. The Queen will want to kill him.
In an interview, Rowan explained her push for Lawless, saying, "I know all of the actresses here, and I'd already cast Lucy in the film Rainbow Warrior. I was auditioning babyish women who look like they could also be warriors as opposed to anorexic princesses. When she came in for an audition, I remember being impressed that this girl had something special. So when we were looking at casting the part of the Amazon Queen in New Zealand, I pushed for her. And then, after the producers had decided to go with an American actress, Roma Downey, I kept trying to get Lucy back for another part. Eric Grundeman even joked with me, "You related to Lucy?" The success of Hercules and the Amazon Women and the following 4 movies led to an ongoing series titled Hercules: The Legendary Journeys, which debuted in 1995.
Only one man dared to challenge their power: Hercules.
Lucy Lawless impressed the producers of Hercules well enough that she was cast for a new role in the series. Although this wouldn't be Xena either. Rather, she played Lila, a girl who hangs out with centaurs in an episode that serves as a thin allegory for racism.
You'd probably be a bridesmaid if you didn't hang around with us.
I choose my own friends.
The character, while perfectly fine in the episode, wasn't exactly a breakout role for Lawless. Lila did return in a Season 2 episode, with Lawless reprising the role, but it was the briefest of appearances, as another character she portrayed in the first season of Hercules took off in a big way. The 9th episode of the first season of Hercules: The Legendary Journeys was titled The Warrior Princess, and it introduced us to Xena.
If you can't learn to fight better than that, then you're never gonna defeat Hercules. And I want him dead.
In this episode, Xena uses her sexual wiles to tempt Hercules' buddy Aeolus into betraying him. Naturally, this doesn't last as the two pals eventually reconcile and work together to stop Xena and her army.
You haven't heard the last of me, Hercules! Yeah!
The episode with the first appearance of Xena was written by John Schulian. Rob Tappert, in an interview, explains how Schulian first came to him with an idea and how the character was formed. John was producing Hercules and said he wanted to do a story of Hercules and the woman who comes between him and his best friend. I'd been working on this idea for a 3-episode arc of an evil warrior princess who had a lot of those Hong Kong fighting abilities and was a real tough, nasty character who would kill her own men and do whatever she had to do to succeed. Lucy Lawless wasn't the first choice to play Xena. Roma Downey was considered for the role, having played Hippolyta in the first Hercules movie, but she had already moved on to star in Touched by an Angel. Vanessa Angel was suggested by Universal as she was already on one of their shows, Weird Science, but when she was hit with a sudden illness, she had to drop out from the role. In the midst of scrambling for a replacement, a lot of different actors were suggested, such as Kim Delaney, but in her case, her manager didn't want her going all the way to New Zealand in the midst of pilot season in Los Angeles. Pilot season being when all the big network shows were casting for the programs that would make the lucrative fall TV lineup. This pattern repeated itself for many of the actors who passed at the prospect of flying across the Pacific for a 3-episode arc. In an interview, Rob Tappert explained how they went with Lawless.
I told the studio, because they didn't know they were doing a Xena series. It was just for a 3-episode arc, and they went, well, you just used her. And we said, well, we'll dye her hair black.
Xena would be fairly fleshed out right from her very first appearance. Her name is taken from the Greek word for stranger, reflecting her eventual outsider status as a former villain turned hero. And Xena would further differentiate herself with her unique fighting style, very much inspired by Hong Kong action movies, in particular the 1993 movie The Bride with White Hair. Xena was also given her iconic weapon, the chakram. In an interview, Rob Tappert explained why he went with the chakram, saying, "I had a book of ancient weapons and I saw this weird discus called the chakram, and I said, let's give her this because it can return and we'll never have another character use it." Xena also debuted with a distinct battle cry, one that would be her signature call, much in the way Tarzan had his classic yell. Lucy Lawless described how she developed the battle cry in an interview.
I remember Rob saying, we need a call for you, like Tarzan has this call. And we were watching television and all these Iranian women were going bonkers over a funeral, and they had that ululation, and I was like, can't do that. My tongue won't go side to side like that. So I just kind of bastardized it and made my own, and that's how that came to be.
After her debut as a villain, Xena would be featured in the final 2 episodes of the first season of Hercules, putting her on the path to redemption. After she turns on her army, Hercules helps convince Xena that she doesn't have to walk the path of evil.
What now?
What do you say we go find out together?
And yes, they do have sex and fall in love.
There's so much in my life I have to make amends for. I've got to get started.
The original plan for this 3-parter was to have Xena die at the end. Instead, we see her riding away into a spin-off of her own. According to an interview with Rob Tappert, the decision to give Xena her own series came very quickly, in part because Hercules had been so successful that Universal wanted to try and capitalize on that success by packaging it with a more similar show as part of their 2-hour action pack. Dan Filley, who worked at Universal, described the state of the action pack saying, "We're talking to the Tribune guys, who represent 20% of syndicated stations in the country, and at that point they had to pick up for the fall, and they wanted to pick up Hercules and didn't want to pick up Vanishing Sun. And we did not want to be in a situation where we were not building on Hercules." Lucy Lawless explained the process from her perspective behind the scenes.
Sid Sheinberg sat in a Universal meeting. He picked up an 8x10 of Xena thing, and he went, "I like her."
That went down before the Warrior Princess episode of Hercules even aired, which really emphasizes the impression Lawless made as someone who could carry a series. Xena Warrior Princess was going to be a challenging series to get off the ground. Rob Tappert explained how he pitched the series to syndication groups in an interview saying, "Everyone believed there was no market for a woman superhero. Xena would be something different. It wouldn't be a female Hercules. I cut a 6-minute demo tape of Hong Kong movie action sequences and said, we don't have the time to deliver these at this level, but this is going to be the kind of action that she does, and it's different than anything on TV right now." R.J. Stewart was brought on to co-executive produce the series alongside Rob Tappert. The series would begin after the events of Xena's turn towards being a hero, but they wanted to expand on her past as well. Working together, they crafted a backstory for Xena that would be explored in the first season of the series, explaining how Xena went from a tomboy in her village to leading her own army after her village was attacked, and she got trapped in a cycle of vengeance. Whereas Hercules was well established as a hero in his series, Xena would have this much darker legacy, one that would follow her in this quest to redeem herself. And much like she was in the process of transforming, she existed in a transitory period between eras. Lucy Lawless summarized her journey in an interesting way, saying, "Xena is about the end of the Greek gods, the denouement, when human beings are really starting to fight back against their supernatural oppressors. I think that the evolving nature of human psyches would eventually bring about the demise of these gods." Xena wouldn't be going on this journey alone, though. Renee O'Connor would be cast as Gabrielle, Xena's partner. Gabrielle was conceived as a moral compass for Xena. Rob Tappert described her saying, "Just prior to starting Xena, some writer who was hot at the time said, every single story is a story of redemption. And I thought about it, and I'm like, yeah, at some level it is. But in this particular case, what does it mean when you're no longer evil and you want to find a better moral compass in life?" Gabrielle was that moral compass for Xena, and that united them together. O'Connor had previously appeared in the second Hercules TV movie, Hercules and the Lost Kingdom, as Deianira. Although R.J. Stewart didn't have O'Connor in mind when he first wrote the character, Tappert thought she would be a great fit for the role, but he still had to go through the traditional casting process. He said in an interview, "When we came up with the idea for Xena and Gabrielle, Renee was always front and center in my mind as to who Gabrielle was. We went through a lot of casting because the studio wanted to look at other options. Was she too young? Was she too this? Was she too that? We brought her back numerous times." Renee O'Connor described it from her perspective, saying,
"Rob had a lot of resistance from the studio in wanting someone that was younger to play the part. And so he just persevered through all the auditioning processes that, I went to. And eventually it worked out."
Beth Himsom-Iyer, the U.S. casting director for both Hercules and Xena, said, "She had a wild sense of humor, an intelligence, and with all that, still a youthful quality. Remember, in mythological times, Gabrielle could not be 25, 26 years old and still living at home and dreaming of going off on an adventure. The lifespan at that time was not that great, so that youthful look was important. And even though Renee may not be 18, she definitely still had a wide-eyed, innocent freshness to her. Gabrielle would be that innocent farm girl who dreamt of being a traveling bard. And what better traveling companion for a bard than a warrior like Xena?"
Xena, I'm not cut out for this village life. I was born to do so much more.
With O'Connor as Gabrielle, the principal cast was complete. Although Xena Warrior Princess would feature many guest stars, including Hudson Lake as Callisto, Kevin Smith as Ares, and Ted Raimi as Joxer, only Xena and Gabrielle would appear in every episode of the series. Xena Warrior Princess would debut in September of 1995 with the pilot episode, Sins of the Past. Sins of the Past opens with Xena deciding to abandon her life of being a warrior. That doesn't last when she sees a group of innocent people who are in danger. One of the people she rescues is Gabrielle, who is instantly enamored, but is rebuffed by Xena when she asks to tag along. When Xena returns to her hometown of Amphipolis, due to her warlord ways of the past, she's rejected by her mother, played by Darian Tackle, and then Xena is nearly killed by an angry mob.
But I can assure you, Xena is a changed woman. I saw her do some heroic things in the name of good.
When the warlord Draco, played by Jay Lagaya, attacks the village, Xena has to defend it, and through that she reconciles with her mother.
Mother, forgive me, please. I forgive you.
And Xena begins her travel on the road to redemption, with Gabrielle as her new traveling companion. This first episode did a lot to establish what Xena Warrior Princess would be as a series. Xena's path to redeem herself begins, and so does her important relationship with Gabrielle. We can even see a trace of the much-storied subtext between the two of them in one line.
She'd never let a man get close enough to do her. At least not that kind of do her. But a young, innocent-looking girl like me, I'll catch her totally off guard.
The visuals of the series are fantastic, thanks in no small part to the beauty of New Zealand. The first episode also features Xena using her signature nerve pinch for the first time.
I've just blocked off the flow of blood to your brain. You'll be dead in 20 seconds unless I release you.
The pinch would be used throughout the series, and as brutal as it seems, it was actually meant to soften the character a little. This is producer Liz Friedman remembering Rob Tappert's explanation.
The thing that was great about the pinch is I think one of the reasons you were drawn to it is that it gave us a way to never have to have Xena have a sword or a knife to somebody's throat.
There are some notable departures from Xena's appearance on Hercules. One that stood out to me was Lucy Lawless seeming far more confident in the role, and the tone of the story was a bit darker than the average episode of Hercules. R.J. Stewart, who wrote the pilot, described it saying, "In writing the pilot, I really could not be too faithful to the Hercules Xena because we had to make a good series of our own. It was not really a matter of supporting her character from Hercules, but rather what character we could make up inspired by the Hercules trilogy that could sustain a series." Also, I need to highlight how absolutely ridiculous the final fight sequence is in the episode, where Xena and Draco are balancing on the heads of villagers as they trade blows. The director for the episode, Doug Leffler, explained the scene in an interview. "We took inspiration from the Jet Li film, The Legend of Fon Sayuk, for the climactic battle, which was one of my favorite films. I love that scene so much that I jumped at the opportunity to do a sequence like it for the Xena pilot. It's a pretty close lift, albeit not nearly as long or detailed as the fight scene in the Jet Li movie. This action was a major staple of Xena Warrior Princess, and there would be far more over-the-top action in the seasons to come."
A land in turmoil cried out for a hero.
Xena Warrior Princess had some really extreme action, often showing our hero defy gravity or show off superhuman strength. All of these elaborate action sequences were quite striking for a weekly TV series to pull off, and a lot of that is of course thanks to a very dedicated stunt team. Following the completion of Xena Warrior Princess, many of them would go on to have a lot of success throughout Hollywood, and it's impressive what they were able to do with a weekly series that often had multiple action sequences in each episode. The stunt performers gained such a reputation that one of Lucy Lawless's stunt doubles, Zoe Bell, would even transition into acting, starring in the 2007 movie Death Proof. Although stunt doubles were frequently used to film the action scenes, the actors also received martial arts training from Douglas Wong.
They didn't want anything to be like any type of gladiator fighting or cowboy fighting. They were more into what's known as, at that time, the Hong Kong style of fighting.
Creating these action sequences requires a lot of filming, and that's why the series also had to make use of a second filming unit that would help fill out most of the action sequences with additional footage. Robert Field, an editor for the series, explained in an interview, "The second unit photography makes a big difference in the action sequences, and the small details and nuances in cutaways and inserts. All shows use inserts and cutaways of that nature, but having a second unit crew to go out and do it well, we get the extra footage that the editing team need, and that is a rarity." Being shot in the 90s also meant that most of the action was done practically without the use of computer graphics, which has helped it age incredibly well. When you see Lucy Lawless blowing fire, that's actually her blowing the fire. On the occasion when the series did use computer effects, it was usually very noticeable. Some of it looked very cool and has aged surprisingly well, like the shot where Xena meets Poseidon from the intro sequence. Other uses of CG were less impressive.
She's free.
And probably the most laughable one was when Gabrielle's face appeared on a spider. While some of these special effects don't hold up quite so well, at the time they were actually considered pretty good, especially for television, and they serve as a reminder of just how far the art form has come in the last 30 years. The costume and makeup team also put a considerable amount of work and deserve some special recognition. While there were a few missteps early on, like these weird dudes coming out of eggs, more frequently we saw really stunning creatures like the terrifying Bacchus or the monstrous Dagnine, both in Season 2. Much of the production staff would go on to work on Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy while Xena was still being produced, which really emphasizes the talent of the New Zealand crew working on the series that they would be in such high demand. They were a huge part of what gave this series such a distinct look.
The power.
The first episode after the pilot, Chariots of War, presents Xena with an alternative to her new quest to redeem herself. After she gets hit with an arrow, a single father helps nurse her back to health. And while there, a life of domesticity presents itself with a ready-made family.
I've never worn anything like this before.
It belonged to my wife.
Xena rejects that life because ultimately she is gripped by her dark history, one that won't let her move forward without making amends for her past misdeeds. Lucy Lawless had an interesting perspective on what drove Xena to try and do better in the world.
She couldn't forgive herself for something she had done in her past, which we only find out in the very last episodes what that was. So she always felt that she was irredeemable and not worthy.
A large part of Xena's past is her relationship with Ares, the god of war. He often presents himself as a seductive force, urging Xena back towards her life as a warlord, and the energy between them is deeply sexual.
You were always fighting for a better world. You were going to conquer it, and then you were going to rule it.
Kevin Smith, who played Ares, described the direction he got for the episode, saying, "The director, Charlie Sibbert, said, okay, here's what they want to achieve in this scene. You can be all those things, but don't be smarmy. Be sure, be seductive, and all the rest of it, but don't be smarmy and cocksure." The sexual relationship between Xena and Ares would be explored more so in later seasons, and I'll get to that in a later section. But for now, I want to talk about the whole notion of Ares as Xena's father that was floated in the early parts of the series. In Season 1's Ties That Bind, a man claiming to be Xena's father arrives, only to be revealed as Ares in disguise.
Ares.
Yes.
For a moment, we need to put aside that it's incredibly strange that the first time Xena and Ares interact, they're on the cusp of having sex, and the second time they interact, he's pretending to be her father. There's a lot of heavy symbolism going on there. But focusing on the father part specifically, Xena is driven by a sense of unworthiness because of her past misdeeds and her father. She believes that he ran out on her and their family when she was still a young girl, contributing to Xena's lack of self-worth. Her journey to make up for her mistakes can be paired in an interesting way with wanting to find her father and to be worthy of his love. Ares, by masquerading as her father, reveals the role he had in her life, that is, providing a sort of validation she needs. In the Season 3 opener, The Furies, Xena is driven to madness by the Furies thanks to Ares' meddling. To break the spell, Xena must avenge the murder of a family member, and she finds out that her father didn't abandon her, but rather was murdered by her mother.
I killed Xena's father.
Xena's father was drunk and convinced by a priest of Ares to sacrifice his daughter, so Xena's mother killed him to protect her daughter. Xena concocts an elaborate story explaining how her father is someone else.
But how could she kill my father when my father is very much alive? Right, Daddy?
The revelations of this episode changed dramatically the relationships on the show, but the scar that was created by a father's supposed betrayal never quite fades. Rather than being failed by her family, Xena's dark turn can be tied more closely to the gods, in this case Ares, taking advantage of her family's trauma. Although considering Ares' priest was somehow involved in this, you could make the argument that Ares was responsible for this from the very beginning. So he very much becomes her metaphorical father. This would not be a major part of the series going forward, as Xena's absent father fades away as a storyline in the seasons to come. Instead, her past would be filled out with other adventures that highlight her various crimes in the past around the ancient world. At the time, there was a debate on the creative team over whether or not to make Xena Ares' daughter. Ultimately, the decision not to do that came from an unlikely place.
The studio got very upset. The implications of what that meant, making it Hercules' half-brother.
And also, wasn't there a sense that it belittled Xena's achievements?
Her human achievements?
Yeah.
Did indeed. And it made it kind of incestuous that she was hitting on with her father.
Xena's father is hardly the only person in her family she mourns. One of her brothers, Lycius, died fighting alongside her when her village was first invaded, and that also adds to her sense of guilt, although this relationship too would be rarely referenced in future episodes. Perhaps Xena's most important family connection that captures her feeling of guilt and regret is represented by her son, Solon, played by David Taylor. He's not brought up in the first season at all, but in the season 2 opener, Orphan of War, we're introduced to him. When Xena went to war with the Centaurs, she and her army were left in a stalemate. A truce was negotiated, and as a gesture of good faith, Xena gave up Solon to the leader of the Centaurs.
If he stays with me, he'll become a target for all those who hate me. And he'll learn things a child should never know. He'll become like me.
10 years later, there is a sort of reunion, though Xena never reveals her connection to Solon. She only hopes that he'll grow up to find a better life than the one she had.
I'm not a warrior. I don't think I want to be.
Your mother would be very proud of you.
You think so?
I know so.
It's one of the more touching moments of the series, and while it wasn't the last we'd see of Solon, it once again spoke to Xena's inability to see herself as someone worthy of love. Even if it made sense to leave Solon behind, she doesn't let him know the truth of who she is to him, and she denies herself the love that he's ready to give. Ironically, Xena is, in a way, recreating the dynamic she imagined her father doing to her, only letting Solon believe that his mother is dead instead. Either way, Solon will now have to grow up missing his parents because Xena doesn't think she can accept the role of mother. This is what shapes Xena as a tragic figure, a person trying to do good but never allowing herself the pleasures she believes are reserved for truly good people. She has a deep sense of unworthiness, instilled in her by the gods, and then more strongly forged by the very real crimes of her past. What makes her more compelling as a character is that, rather than simply drift from place to place consumed by guilt and perpetual acts of penance, she's able to understand herself as something more than a tool for retribution, and that understanding comes through her relationship with Gabrielle. When we first meet Gabrielle, she is in some ways an empty vessel. Producer Liz Friedman explains.
Xena was the hero, and Gabrielle was sort of a representative of the audience.
A simple girl who grew up in the small village of Pododia, Gabrielle learns just as much about herself as she does Xena throughout the series. In the 10th episode, Hooves and Harlots, Gabrielle has her first major moment of growth when she and Xena happen upon Amazons, and Gabrielle risks her life to protect an Amazon princess.
What you did, only an Amazon would do for another Amazon. I want you to take my rite of caste.
Gabrielle is given the rite of caste, making her next in line to be the leader of the Amazons. From here, she gets a makeover and starts learning how to fight with a staff.
Show me that again.
The episode's writer, Stephen L. Sears, remarked on this episode in an interview saying, "I realized how limiting it was for Gabrielle to be walking around in that peasant outfit all the time, just standing around in the background going, 'Go Xena, get him Xena.' We'd already gotten tired of it just in what we'd seen. I thought she should be able to defend herself, but not with a weapon where she could kill. Theoretically, you can kill anybody with anything, but I wanted her to have a weapon that was primarily defensive." He goes on to explain how the Amazon princess role was something that was originally going to be dropped in the episode it was introduced, but for some reason it stuck around, and Gabrielle's connection to the Amazons would be explored in the seasons to come. What makes Gabrielle an interesting counterpoint to Xena is that even though so much of the series is about Xena confronting her past, that's not a version of Xena that Gabrielle knows.
I find it hard to understand the hatred that she gets sometimes when we travel from people who just don't know her the way I know her. I guess they're afraid of the old Xena.
Gabrielle doesn't see Xena as someone who needs to be redeemed, but rather someone doing good in the world. It raises the interesting question of how we define a person as good or bad, whether it's their actions in the present or the lasting impact of the actions of their past. Ultimately, what Gabrielle offers Xena is a way of stepping out of her own memories and being part of the present day, to not feel chained to her past, but to instead embrace a better version of herself in the present. Gabrielle is a sort of liberation from that guilt, and it reveals how much of Xena's image of herself as a villain exists in her mind. When Xena's past comes back to haunt her, Gabrielle is with her every step of the way, always encouraging Xena to do right by the people she's harmed. But she also reminds Xena that she isn't defined by what she did in the past, but more so what she does in the present. As for herself, Gabrielle, especially early on, is chasing her dream of being a traveling bard, and that romantic vision of living a heroic life is contrasted by the very real traumas that come with walking the same path as Xena. At the end of the first season, there's an episode where Gabrielle has to confront the messy reality of war when she works in a makeshift hospital, helping treat people who have been injured. It's an interesting episode that looks at the consequences of all the violence we see and the very real horrors and traumas it can inflict on people. Gabrielle's near-death experience mirrors in a way her own rebirth, as she starts to understand the real horrors that are involved with some of these adventures she and Xena are going on.
How can I leave you? We have so many wars to stop and despots to foil. You're gonna need my help.
I couldn't do it without you.
A new start isn't as simple as changing one's actions, or at least one's actions aren't so easily detached from their past. Xena's greatest test comes from possibly her most memorable villain, Callisto. Although briefly appearing in the episode titled The Greater Good, Callisto makes a proper debut in the episode named after her near the end of Season 1.
Who are you?
I'm Xena, warrior princess.
Callisto is a major challenge to Xena, and she's also something of a twisted version of her.
I'm good! As good as you. Why not? You made me.
Callisto's origin story was that her family was wiped out by a fire in her village during an attack from Xena's army.
I think when her whole family was destroyed by Xena, she had nowhere to focus her energy on. And she had no love coming in, no guidance. She was left without anybody, so her focus became Xena.
Callisto's quest for vengeance is really interesting in that she has a very good point about Xena never facing justice.
But you tell me this, Xena. Have you ever been tried for all of the things you have done? Have you ever been handed over to a mob that wanted your blood?
R.J. Stewart, the writer for the episode, reflected on it saying, "I was driving to work one day and thought, boy, Xena got off awful easy, didn't she? We stated as her backstory that she was this terrible looter and burner and pillager, and then one day she decided to go good. And that was it. She got away with it. There's got to be somebody out there whose life she ruined. What does that person think?" Xena choosing to redeem herself without ever facing justice for what she did speaks to how her quest is something she has taken upon herself unilaterally. But is it really just for her victims not to have any say in how she can be redeemed? They are the ones she harmed, after all. And Callisto is obviously included as one of her victims. While we see Xena make amends with people like her mother and the other folks of her home village, what happens when there is no easy path towards redemption? How can Xena possibly right the wrong she did to Callisto? Callisto isn't interested in Xena's redemption. She wants vengeance. And Xena has no easy way of undoing the harm she's done to her. She can't bring her family back to life. So how can Xena possibly right this wrong? It's an interesting moral dilemma, far too challenging to be resolved in one episode, as Xena can barely manage to keep herself and Gabrielle alive while dealing with Callisto's machinations. Callisto's debut episode ends with a very striking fight where Xena and Callisto are battling on ladders. And when it looks like Callisto is about to die, Xena decides to save her. And luckily for the audience, and not so lucky for Xena, this isn't the last we'll be seeing of Callisto. Hudson Lake's performance is very odd for Callisto in that, in bits and pieces, it feels like it shouldn't work, but somehow it does. Her performance is like someone who enjoys the reflection in a cracked mirror. Although Callisto's appearance was originally conceived as a multi-part story, Callisto was written as a standalone episode because they wanted to see how the character worked out first. Luckily, she was such a strong success that they brought her back to further her arc. In Seasons 2, Return of Callisto, we find out that Callisto has broken out of prison to continue her quest of vengeance against Xena. Before this, though, as a bit of setup, Gabrielle had recently been reunited with her former fiancé, Perdiccas, played by Scott Garrison. He had long since stopped being the farmer we had briefly seen in the first episode and instead become something of a warrior. Gabrielle, liking what she sees in this new Perdiccas, decides to accept his marriage proposal.
Bless your union for eternity.
Callisto, looking to hurt Xena in any way she can, kills Perdiccas.
No! No! Spartacus!
That'll do.
When Gabrielle declares she wants to kill Callisto, a line she hadn't crossed at this point, we see her morals be tested when the opportunity presents itself. The episode's writer, R.J. Stewart, explained in an interview how Gabrielle and Callisto contrast one another. The world is condemned to exist in a cycle of pain and violence until somebody breaks it. Gabrielle hopes and aspires to break it. Callisto is clearly the opposite of Gabrielle. She was dealt this harsh, horrible blow early in her life, and she just became a part of it. That tidal wave of violence and hate swept her up and has become the driving influence in her life. Gabrielle's husband was murdered, and she chose not to allow herself to be swept up in the same way. Luckily for Gabrielle, Xena rescues her. At the end of a chariot battle Xena has with Callisto, the two both end up in quicksand. Xena watching Callisto die is one of the darker moments in the series, and a reminder of how Xena hasn't completely lost her heart or edge. The episode highlights how Xena is operating on a sense of justice that is influenced by her own personal interests. Had Gabrielle's husband not been Callisto's victim, and Gabrielle being a possible target in the future, Xena might have been less willing to watch Callisto die. Xena's path to redemption is still one that's relatively self-centered, and so Callisto is still right to call her out on this hypocrisy. Xena, as this self-appointed agent of justice, may help the regular people of ancient Greece, and she'll sometimes put herself at the mercy of society's justice in other episodes, but she's willing to break those rules for the people important to her. And while she claims to want to redeem herself to the people she's wronged, her decision to let Callisto die is an admission that she will never be able to fully complete that journey. Xena is not some perfect agent of moral justice, but a flawed person doing the best they can. It reveals the inherent challenges of trying to change one's ways for the better. As much as we may wish Xena could do better in her life, part of this process is accepting that this is a journey that will not have a fully satisfying ending where Xena rights every wrong she committed. The director for the episode, T.J. Scott, said in an interview, "It really wasn't until we were on set filming it, and on the take where Xena was supposed to try and save her, that she didn't. Lucy just stood there and watched her go and then said, 'That's what Xena would do.' So it was sort of made right then. In the editing, we still had two versions, and we decided right at the end how we were going to do it." Lucy Lawless expanded on this, saying, "We originally shot it differently. We shot it where I do try to save her and she dies anyway. I get the whip and try to throw it to her. I hesitate, but I do it, so that I could have a little bit of moral high ground in the next episode. You see, when she comes back and accuses me of murdering her, I say, 'No, I did try to save you, you hag,' that sort of thing. But when I had my accident, they just quickly re-edited everything." While promoting the series, Lucy Lawless had a riding accident performing on The Tonight Show with Jay Leno. The horse she was riding on was spooked, knocking her off the saddle and leading to several pelvic fractures. The injury led to Lawless being out of action for the next few weeks while the series was in production, which led to the surprisingly quick return of Callisto. In the episode Intimate Stranger, airing just 2 weeks after the return of Callisto, we see Callisto, return. Xena is still struggling with her choice to let Callisto die.
It's time you admitted it.
All right. I am guilty of murder.
Xena's guilt allows her mind to be swapped with Callisto, while in Callisto's body, Xena has to escape Tartarus, an ancient Greek version of hell. Although Xena is able to defeat her rival, instead of things going back to normal, the body stop lasts for another episode and we get an entire Xena adventure with Xena trapped in Callisto's body, giving Lucy Lawless time to recover from her injury. Eventually, they trade bodies back and Xena is in her body and Callisto is back in Tartarus.
Xena? It's you, right? Not Callisto?
It's me. Go on, test me.
We'll overcome our damaged past.
After Callisto is dealt with for the time being, Xena's journey for redemption continued in a multi-episode arc through the first half of the 3rd season that fans have colorfully dubbed The Rift. In the Season 3 episode, The Deliverer, Xena and Gabrielle encounter a cult who worship the one god. What seemed like a reference to an actual religion is actually some misdirection, and the god in question is revealed to be Dayhawk.
Dayhawk will bring the cleansing fire of war to the world, a war begun of innocence.
This is not the one God of the Israelites.
Gabrielle, trying to stop their sacrifice, kills one of the cultists.
Accidentally, you
No, I stabbed her. I murdered her.
This being the first time she's taken a life makes Gabrielle the perfect vessel as we see Dayhawk consume her in flames, and we later find out that Gabrielle is impregnated with Dayhawk's child. This moment was particularly controversial as it was considered by some viewers as a sexual assault, though the writer on the episode, Stephen L. Sears, contests that, specifically blaming an article that described it as such. He said in an interview, "If you want to say Gabrielle was violated, then hey, go for it. Use that word. She was definitely violated. But I won't use the word rape because of what it conjures up and what it diminishes. But we had to deal with that. As soon as I saw that word in print, I was angry. And if the episode had aired without that, there probably would have been a ripple effect, but people would not have been fired up as much." Renee O'Connor in interviews seemed to take a similar line.
I know that we wanted to create something that was sort of seductive, and that's where I went, that she was lured into, again, the flames. And yeah, so I didn't think of it as a rape at the time.
The moment was very contentious in the fan community. I've read some compelling arguments from people who have experienced sexual violence in both directions. I suppose it'll be up to each individual viewer who watches this scene. The fallout of this moment has less to do with the trauma of that experience and more to do with the pregnancy that followed. Gabrielle has a very rapid pregnancy and her child is born in the next episode. The Dayhawk cultists consider this child, who Gabrielle names Hope, as their chosen one, who will usher in a new dark age. When the baby is revealed to be pure evil, Xena tries to kill her, but Gabrielle won't let her child be murdered. Instead, Gabrielle hides Hope and pretends that she killed her.
I threw her down there.
The next major section of the rift was the epic two-parter, The Debt, where Xena is summoned to the Kingdom of Qin to settle an old debt, the Kingdom of Qin being an ancient version of China. In the episode, we learn more of Xena's past, including the time where she went to Qin and met a woman named Lao Ma, played by Jacqueline Kim.
I have been blessed or cursed with the ability to see into the souls of others. You don't know it yet, Xena, but you're a remarkable woman, capable of greatness.
We learn how Lao Ma rescued Xena and took her under her wing, teaching Xena how to more effectively use her chi to accomplish some of her more elaborate physical feats. She also gives Xena her title.
You're going to help me run the kingdom of Lao. You'll be my warrior princess.
There's an interesting bit of subtext going on here with Xena's action scenes, which were inspired by Hong Kong action movies, and they are now being connected more overtly to a broader Eastern spirituality in the context of the series itself. It's a cute way for the series to nod towards its inspirations within its own context. It's also not so subtly hinted that these two women became more than friends when Lao Ma has to give Xena some air while she's hiding underwater. There will be more to say about this show's subtext in a later section, but this very clearly evokes something more than just trying to keep a person alive. Xena's trip to Qin is a journey to kill Ming Tian, the ruler of the kingdom and Lao Ma's son. By freeing Qin from this very hostile ruler, she feels she will be repaying Lao Ma's debt of saving her life many years ago. When she's about to murder Ming Tian, Xena is stopped by an unexpected person.
Sorry, Xena, I couldn't let you do this.
Gabrielle didn't want Xena to become an assassin and commit cold-blooded murder. Although it seems like a harsh betrayal at the time, Renee O'Connor reflected on this moment from Gabrielle's perspective in an interview. She had just killed someone for the first time, and she went to the other extreme saying that nobody should die for whatever reason. That's why it's justified at all. For Gabrielle, the killing was truly one of the most traumatic times in her life. She has such high moral beliefs, and she had just killed someone, and all she could think about was the good of mankind. That no one, including Ming Tian, should be executed against their will. Her friendship came second to that. Xena eventually forgives Gabrielle for that betrayal, though she still needs to explain to her friend why she feels such a strong debt to Lao Ma.
Not long before I met you, I was at the end of my rope. I was ready to give up. And then I thought of her and what she taught me, and I was reborn.
Xena eventually frees herself and she learns that Ming Tian was the one who killed Lao Ma, and Xena's resolve not to be a murderer is tested again.
You're powerless now. You've lost face in front of your people. They won't follow you anymore.
Your not killing him made you exactly what Lao Ma wanted you to be.
What seemed like Xena's walking away with Lao Ma's teachings in her hand, having humiliated Ming Tian and ascending to a higher moral ground, is instead revealed as something much darker. That's Lao Ma's hairpin, which Xena used to kill Ming Tian. The power of this moment is immense, and it harkens back to when Xena let Callisto die in the previous season. That for all her steps towards becoming a better person, Xena still hasn't abandoned a darker part of herself, particularly when it affects the people she loves. While letting Callisto die is more defensible in that she could have been a threat in the future, Xena and Gabrielle could have simply gone back to Greece. She'd even effectively undermined Ming Tian's rule in his own kingdom. When Xena kills him instead, she's very much doing that to satisfy her own need for vengeance. Xena's journey towards redemption not being a linear one is another reason it's so fascinating. If goodness is found through actions and not through one's inherent character, it presents a hero who is more complicated and flawed in their deeds in a clear and understandable way. It's familiar to anyone who's tried to better themselves when they find themselves occasionally failing to live up to that ideal. What I like so much about this ending is that while Xena's journey becomes messier, we see a hero who can fail in their journey in a way that can't be undone and that they now have to live with. That perhaps we expect too much from someone, even an individual as exceptional as Xena, that there's almost an inevitability of sometimes failing while trying to do better. This journey was never going to be a perfect one. Although dead, Lao Ma would be referenced many times in future episodes, and she obviously had a profound impact on Xena's life. Jacqueline Kim has expressed a lot of affection for the character in many interviews, and through her performance, she helped shape Lao Ma into something more three-dimensional. In an interview, she said, "Sometimes when you play an Asian American role, it can be written in a way that's full of assumptions. Particularly with Lao Ma, everyone assumes that this woman is always wise and just willing to suffer. That image is just an old one for me. It's not one I really relate to, so I try to spice it up. I wanted her to have some passion. I also wouldn't do an Oriental accent. I thought that was absolutely wrong for the part, but I think they expected me to." We got to the table reading and one of the actors said, "Why isn't she doing an accent?" And the director said, "She just got off the plane. She's just reading through it." I said, "Okay, we need to talk about this." At this point in the Rift story arc, we've seen Gabrielle lie to Xena about killing her daughter Hope, and Xena lie to Gabrielle about not killing Ming Tian. But there was one more cataclysmic event that would further divide these partners. But before that, here's a quick rundown of how Callisto has become a god. After being cast out of Xena's body, Callisto was brought back to life in an episode of Hercules: The Legendary Journeys. She continues her food tour by eating ambrosia while teaming with Xena and Gabrielle to fight a rogue Amazon goddess, a fight that leaves Callisto trapped in stone after a lava bath. Callisto is eventually discovered by Gabrielle's rapidly aging daughter Hope, played by Amy Morrison. Hope frees Callisto and the two work together to torment Xena and Gabrielle in the episode Maternal Instincts. The episode also features the return of Solon, who, after the murder of his adopted centaur father, plans to travel with Xena.
Then take me with you. Please, don't leave me.
When all this is over, you be packed and ready to go.
Hope has other plans and manipulates Gabrielle to find out where Solon is and then kills him.
Get out. Xena.
Go!
Gabrielle then poisons Hope, and both children are cremated. But Xena blames Gabrielle for the death of her son.
My son is dead because of you.
I love you, Xena.
This is the moment Xena and Gabrielle are furthest from one another, both having lost a child, and Xena in particular blaming Gabrielle for her loss. This is the culmination of so many pieces of Xena's complicated journey. Without Gabrielle and without Solon, it seems like she's ready to fall back into her old ways. And in the next episode, it opens with Xena dragging Gabrielle off to throw her off a mountain. This episode, The Bittersweet, would try to mend the rift between the two friends in the only way that makes sense, through the power of song. Yes, it's a musical episode, and not just a musical episode that's meant to cap off one of the heaviest arcs in the series. Xena and Gabrielle are sent to the land of Illusia, and through a series of musical numbers written specifically for that episode, work out their issues. And as much as I'd love to play some clips from this episode, YouTube is very sensitive when it comes to music, so here's one small moment where a dog sings.
All in the lips that you kissed.
The music was written by the series composer, Joseph Loduca. Though Loduca would win an Emmy Award for a later season, his work here was particularly strong. He was accompanied by the lyricists Dennis Spiegel and Pamela Phillips Oland. While some actors, including Lucy Lawless and Kevin Smith, sang their parts, others had professional singers take their place. Gabrielle's part was sung by Susan Wood, and Callisto's was sung by Michelle Nicastro, who sounds remarkably similar.
In the land of illusion. Illusion is music, a world built on rhyme.
The episode also had a number of lavish costumes. Some of the designs were published in the official Xena magazine, and you can see those sketches here. The magazine also included with costume designer Nyla Dixon. She said, "There were two things about Bittersweet that were design start points, and Rob was very helpful in establishing our approach. One was that it was all based on the look and feel of the tarot cards, and the other was that it was brightly colored. We wanted a very surreal quality to it." Throughout the episode, we see Xena and Gabrielle going through the musical equivalent of therapy. The episode's writer, Stephen L. Sears, explained, "In the Chamber of Echoes, they can't hear each other as long as they're blaming each other, and that's pure therapy. You can't start to fix a problem if you're too busy blaming the other person, because you're not listening to them." And the moment that Xena asks Gabrielle, "What are you feeling right now?" and Gabrielle says, "I hurt inside," that was the moment of connection. They realized that's what they shared. As the episode reaches its climax, it's revealed that Solon's spirit is what created the land of Illusia, and he trapped Xena and Gabrielle in there so that they might find a way to forgive each other and escape.
I love you so. I'll always love you.
This episode was an enormous swing, and by the end of it, it felt like an absolute home run. In real life, if someone's lie led to the death of your child, I don't think singing about it would solve anything. It'd probably be a bridge too far for most forms of therapy, too. But Xena Warrior Princess is not a show about the real world, and is best understood as metaphor, much like Greek mythology itself. That the actions of these characters would bring them into a magical world where only music can mend the rift between them makes perfect sense. What we can understand in this moment, and what these episodes tells us, is not to sacrifice love by letting hate imprison you. And letting go of hate is the first step towards forgiveness. And in that forgiveness, you can find some kind of redemption. Season 3 ended with a two-parter Sacrifice, where we see Hope resurrected by a priest of Dayhawk, apparently still growing quickly as she's no longer a small child and instead a fully grown woman, and very clearly resembling her mother. Gabrielle, to protect Xena, sacrifices herself by dragging Hope into a lava pit. Neither of these deaths would last, and in Season 4 both returned in a family affair in which Hope is finally killed for good by her son, the Destroyer. The Destroyer's father, by the way, is Ares. The survival of Gabrielle always felt a little bit off, and the writer for the second part of The Sacrifice, Paul Robert Coyle, echoed that in an interview. I said, "Do I have to figure out a way to save Gabrielle next season?" They said, "No, we'll figure that out later." I don't think they ever really did. I think you'll hear them admit they haven't really plugged that hole yet. Another important death at the end of the Season 3 finale was Callisto, who was stabbed with a special god-killing dagger. Although there was some discussion over how intentional this killing was, Lucy Lawless cleared it up in an interview saying, "It's time to put all the stabbing Callisto questions to bed." Xena was thinking that this is never going to happen again. I remember that moment. I have given in every time, with the exception of the time I let her sink down in the quicksand. And we had formed a love-hate relationship, you know? But it had to end. I think Xena knew this unhealthy thing had to end and do it now. If I don't do it now, it's never going to happen. It's like killing your sister, I think. And Hudson Lake's perspective was a bit different.
That's exactly what Callisto wanted. That's what she was hoping for the whole time. That movement where I touch her face and slide down her body, I think was a perfect ending and a perfect thank you. Even though I don't think Xena did it on purpose, I think it was compassionate.
And so Callisto's arc was at an end, or so it seemed. But before the heavy stuff to come, maybe we need a few laughs first.
Joxer the mighty roams through the countryside. He never needs a place to hide.
Xena and Gabrielle were often joined by a trusty companion who deserves a special mention. Xena's beloved horse Argo is with her through much of the series. Argo was played by several horses, though the one most commonly identified as the main horse playing her was Tilly. In an issue of Xena Official Magazine, horse trainer Horace Newton also identified Barbara, a stunt mare that specialized in nodding and rearing, and Mac, a stallion that was more adept at carrying multiple riders. Some other horses have also been identified as plain Argo, but those are the only names I got from an official source. Another thing I got from the horse's mouth was this very special moment. We've very often had stunts where the horse is galloping along and suddenly somebody gets knocked off the horse. We have one horse that was so concerned about that, whoops, my ride is gone, that he came screeching to a halt, rushed back to take a look and see what happened to the poor rider lying on the ground. Argo would eventually be replaced by Argo 2, but that's a whole other story that I'll get to later in the video. For now, I should probably talk about another companion of Xena and Gabrielle, Joxer the Mighty. If you aren't familiar, luckily for you, he has a song.
Righting wrongs and singing songs, being mighty all day long. He's Joxer the Mighty.
Joxer debuted in the first season, where he was slightly overshadowed by the first full appearance of Callisto. Although he was a villain at first, Joxer realized he wasn't a killer and shortly after embraced his destiny of being a hero. Well, a kind of hero.
The last time I saw you, you wanted to join my army, and now you want to fight me? I am so disappointed.
Yeah. Well, I turned good, just like Xena.
Ted Raimi described the character saying, "He isn't just a bumbler. He thinks he's a brilliantly talented warrior and nobody can tell him differently. The other thing that's appealing is that he's like a big 15-year-old, and that's how I play him. His mind stopped developing at 15, but he pretends to be 30. If you ever found Joxer alone for 10 minutes, you would probably find him with a pre-Hellenic comic book eating a donut." Rob Tapert described Joxer as originally being brought on to take some of the comedic burden off of Gabrielle. The fan reaction to Joxer was not immediately warm, though. Ted Raimi described it in an interview.
What they thought was going to happen was they thought I was going to come on the show, start bossing the girls around, whatever, having flings with Xena and Gabrielle, and the fans went, ballistic. Okay, so long as, I don't want to see them slapping any butts or anything like that, so that didn't happen, so they were cool.
Over time, we got to see Joxer as more than a goofy sidekick. He even had some romance in his life, but his big unrequited love was for Gabrielle.
Can you imagine the two of us in love?
Ridiculous.
Yeah. Kind of makes you laugh just to think about it.
We also meet Joxer's brothers, Jet and Jace, in episodes that reveal Joxer as the family goof.
Is Jace here too?
Don't mention our brother's name in public.
Oh yeah, I forgot.
The hand thing Jet does means Jace is gay. In the episode Liar, Liar, Hearts on Fire, we're introduced to him and his accent.
I follow the music, wherever it takes me. I thought you'd be happy it took me to you.
Yeah, made my day.
Hey, quit talking like that. Like what?
Like, I don't know, that stupid accent of yours, like you're from Spain or something.
This episode is notable for being the second musical episode of the series, albeit one that doesn't have quite the same heft as The Bittersweet. It opted to use covers of existing songs instead of an original score, making it feel more like a jukebox sing-along. While not the most popular episode, I still think it's a fun time.
Why can't you and me learn to love one another?
Joxer's storyline here is that he's learning to accept his brother through song, which, while sweet enough, is a very late 90s story beat. Even so, it's nice that Joxer makes peace with having a gay brother.
I'm sure your story was cute.
Cute?
Xena Warrior Princess had a number of unique standalone episodes, many that often drifted into high concepts or complete breaks from the premise. Its highlight episodes in particular had clever framing devices and stood up as episodes in their own right. Unlike other TV programs that made clip episodes with characters trapped in a few locations, sometimes only one, and then use extensive numbers of clips to pad out the episode, Xena's clip episodes were restrained and actually had real storylines. In the first season, the episode titled Athens City Academy of the Performing Bards had Gabrielle telling stories of Xena's adventures to prove her chops as a bard, alongside Euripides and Homer. The stories of one particular bard are a bit different from the ones Gabrielle tells.
And he ripped his chains from the wall. And then he ran through and knocked over a door. And out there's all these guys fighting.
In a story from Homer at the end of the episode, we get a series of clips from the classic movie Spartacus. In Season 2's The Xena Scrolls, the series flashes forward centuries as we see the descendants of the various characters play out an Indiana Jones-esque caper, where one of Gabrielle's scrolls is being treated as an archaeological find.
I came across a curse so horrible that only men of my training and expertise could have faced it and lived.
And in Send in the Clones, we flash forward to the present day where Xena and Gabrielle are cloned and their memories are filled in using clips from the show.
There was nothing that I could do. The police...
What's police?
The local warlords.
In addition to the clip episodes, I want to talk about a couple of other episodes I felt like I needed to mention, but didn't really fit into any other section. Lifeblood was one of the odder episodes of Xena Warrior Princess in that it had huge swaths of footage that weren't really meant to be an episode of the series. With the success of Xena Warrior Princess came the inevitable demand for a spin-off, and that came in the form of Amazon High. Amazon High was meant to take place well before the events of Xena Warrior Princess, where a girl from the modern day, played by Selma Blair, was transported back in time to live with the Amazons.
I am dreaming. No, I'm in the Twilight Zone.
The episode does not spark a ton of faith in Amazon High as a series, though it's difficult to tell when only a couple of clips from a movie-length story are shown. Amazon High was planned to be packaged together with another Renaissance production, Jack of All Trades, a series set during the American Revolutionary War starring Bruce Campbell. In addition to some of the actors no longer being available, Rob Tappert explained in an interview why he decided to drop the series.
And I was at the syndicated TV convention, NAPTI, and I saw Lost World and Beastmaster and all these other shows set in that time coming. And suddenly I went all weak in the knees and went, oh my God, I'll just be lost in that clutter.
Amazon High would be replaced by Cleopatra 2525, about a stripper who is cryogenically frozen after complications from her breast implant surgery. She wakes up hundreds of years in the future where she fights evil robots with her new friends. It ran for 2 seasons. Season 2's Here She Comes Miss Amphipolis has Xena going undercover in a beauty pageant to search for an assassin, perhaps in a nod to Lucy Lawless's personal history. Her history as a former Miss New Zealand winner, not as an assassin. But what makes an otherwise standard goofy Xena episode was the inclusion of Miss Artifice.
You really don't get it, do you? I guess being born a woman, you wouldn't.
Miss Artifice isn't presented in a way that makes her easy to label, other than wanting to be identified as a woman. And for Xena, that's all she really needs to know.
I just hope you let me quit the pageant in private instead of going public with it.
No way. May the best person win.
Although it might have hit differently in 1997, it's hard not to watch this episode today and see this as a kind of trans representation. And importantly, it features the main character acknowledging and respecting that identity. For an episode that aired in 1997, it was a pretty progressive moment. Chris Mannheim, the writer for the episode, talked about it in an interview saying, "I must say, all my gay male friends liked that episode best, and it's the only episode we were nominated for a GLAAD, Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, award over. I went to the GLAAD Awards that year. We didn't win, but it was a fun thing to go and be a part of. We also got an award from a transsexual group. It's probably the most awarded show of the series." And Miss Artifice ends up winning the whole thing. Mannheim spoke about this particular moment in the interview saying, "It was a way we could get away with a full kiss looking like it was between 2 women." Season 3, Been There, Done That, is a fantastic take on the Groundhog Day-inspired premise of being forced to relive the same day over and over.
We've repeated the day that many times.
Yes. But no, yes, no. I tried that yes both ways. No, I don't know. No, again. Are there any more questions? Good.
Watching Xena solve the problems of an entire village while trying to get out of the loop is a lot of fun, and the episode also includes one of the longest chakram throws in the series. There's not a ton of analysis to be done in this one. It was just a lot of fun, and I think it's worth highlighting. In a slightly similar vein, there is You Are There from Season 6, which is one of the oddest high-concept episodes I've ever seen for a show not set in the modern day. What is more or less an ordinary episode of Xena is mostly told from the perspective of a news crew.
Now, Xena, would you care to tell me why you've returned to the Northlands at this time?
This comes completely out of nowhere, and while Xena is caught off guard, she and all the other characters just kind of roll with it, including appearing on these closed-set cutaways where they have sit-down interviews with the host, Nigel, played by Michael Hurst.
Tell me you got that. You got that, didn't you? Did you get that? You got that, huh? A shocking display.
Even more bizarre is that this isn't just a self-contained episode. It fits into the overall narrative of Season 6 and advances plot lines in important ways. It's also a very fun watch, which definitely helps too. And it really highlights how much fun this series has with its own premise.
Are you two lovers?
You want the truth?
That's right, Xena. We want the truth. The whole world wants the truth.
Technically.
Are you in love with Gabrielle?
You got some pear on you, mister.
One of the most talked about parts of Xena Warrior Princess is the implied lesbian relationship between Gabrielle and Xena. Although it's never stated explicitly in an episode, there are lots of hints suggesting a romantic relationship between the two, lovingly referred to by fans as the subtext. The idea of Xena and Gabrielle being lovers was something hypothesized almost instantly by the audience. Lucy Lawless, in an interview, said that she believes it was intentionally seeded there by the producers.
I remember it was like the 8th episode in, and we saw something from the Village Voice about the lesbian relationship between these two, and we were like, what, are they crazy? And of course, Rob and Liz Friedman, the writers, were like, wah! Like they totally knew, they knew what they were doing. It was just me and Renee who were like, really? You know.
Rob Tapert described the early days of production, saying, "Before we started shooting Xena, we shot the material that we were going to use to create the opening title sequences with. The studio was so concerned that it would be perceived as a lesbian show that they would not allow us to have Xena and Gabrielle in the same frame of the opening titles. The truth was, and I know it's such a different era, we thought we were pushing the boundaries by giving Xena a history of having men of color in her past. But over time, as these two characters took on a life of their own, people breathed their own lives and hopes into them." In the early episodes, we see a few male love interests for Xena and Gabrielle come and go, usually because they get killed, like Xena's old lover Marcus and Gabrielle's aforementioned husband Perdiccas. One thing I noticed about Gabrielle's attraction to Perdiccas, though, is that she had no interest in him when he was a farmer, but when they meet again at Troy and she sees what a great warrior he's become, she's suddenly into him. Look at how she stares at him right after he saves the day. Perdiccas has an echo of Xena about him, and I think that's what draws Gabrielle to him. This isn't to say Gabrielle's feelings were misplaced or misdirected, but I don't think it can be ignored that Gabrielle's first love only became her first love after he started acting more like Xena. This is the sort of subtext I suspect people were reading into these episodes, along with lines like these.
What about Hercules?
What about him?
You're not much of a girl talk, are you? Of course, you're not like most girls.
In the first season episode, Altered States, we really see the show lean into the subtext.
How was that?
Very good. We're getting the hang of it.
Really?
Come on, Gabrielle. You've been wanting to do this for ages.
Discussing this episode, Rob Tapert said, "It was really only in this episode that we visually pushed the boundaries and planted the seed that Gabrielle was hot for Xena. We also added, for those who might read something into it, the opening fishing sequence. Producer Liz Friedman could not believe that we would have these erotic insinuations in the teaser. I also pushed Chris Mannheim to write a very specific opening with fishing and innuendo." An important part of this moment in the series is how it reflects the way in which the creative team is responding to part of the audience, adding small teases to fuel their speculation in a way that might not have happened had they not known the sort of subtext fans were reading into the series. It's one of the strengths of long-form storytelling in television, being able to tailor a show based on direct feedback from the audience. While this can sometimes be a double-edged sword, in this instance it seemed to work really well. More than just some kind of titillating physical relationship, though, Xena and Gabrielle have a deep love for one another. As seen in the finale to the first season, Is There a Doctor in the House, when Gabrielle is nearly killed.
Wake up! Wake up! Wake up!
There's no subtext in this moment. Xena very obviously and clearly loves Gabrielle. Whatever their bond might be called, episodes and moments like these show us that they're more than just traveling companions. And it also may be why certain elements of the audience latched onto it so strongly. This wasn't some implied lesbian relationship designed to give people these visual delights of two attractive women having sex with one another. This was a real relationship between two women who deeply love one another. And fleshing it out even further, there's this playful side to the relationship that's very endearing. It's seen very keenly in this season 2 episode, A Day in the Life, which shows them in a more relaxed state.
Xena, this was our only frying pan. Why do you do that? You do have weapons, don't you?
I like to be creative in a fight. It gets my juices going.
Can we cook with your juices?
Another strength of long-form storytelling is effectively presenting a relationship like this through many different lenses and in many different moments. It makes this relationship feel so much more real. Xena and Gabrielle experience highs and lows, in the context of a fantasy world, of course, but it evokes the feeling of a real relationship. In the Season 2 episode Destiny, Xena seemingly dies. The following episode, The Quest, has her spirit inhabit the body of the King of Thieves and friend of Xena and Gabrielle, Autolycus, played by Bruce Campbell.
I think I'll keep that favor thing in mind. Might just come in handy one day for the King of Thieves.
This was also an episode that featured a very light Lucy Lawless present to cover for the pelvis injury she got while filming that sketch for The Tonight Show. Aside from being a good two-parter, this notably has what might be considered the first romantic kiss between Xena and Gabrielle, kinda. As Xena speaks to Gabrielle through Autolycus, they share a vision together.
I can't lose you again.
Gabrielle will always be here.
It's unfortunate that they cut just at that moment, though Xena and Gabrielle would have more chances in the future. In an interview, Renee O'Connor said, "Lucy had only just come back from her accident and she couldn't do a whole lot. We didn't actually smooch, but we had the shot and we came in very close together. We were definitely there." In spite of a moment like this, the show would go back to making the relationship more subtextual. In Season 3's Fins, Femmes, and Gems, characters are put under a spell to make them obsessive.
I looked into your eyes, and Xena, I finally realized there can only be one person for me in my life. Me.
The original version of this script actually had Gabrielle obsessed with Xena, but in the version that was eventually made, Gabrielle would instead be obsessed with herself.
It was actually, I remember, 2 days before we started shooting, and the studio just said, "You cannot do this."
Steve and RJ sat down over the weekend and changed Gabrielle obsessed with sexual positions with Xena to Gabrielle obsessed with herself.
The series was always squeamish about fully committing to the lesbian relationship. Rob Tappert explained why in an interview from a business perspective. The really hardcore fans like it, and there may be 100,000 of them, but that's only a tenth of a rating point. The lesbian fans really like it, and I appreciate that, I really do, but they aren't the majority of the audience. I sat behind glass windows during research as people in Phoenix and people in New Jersey said, "We want them to have more guys. We like guys. We want Xena and Gabrielle to have boyfriends." I think it would be wrong, having an opportunity like we have with Xena and Gabrielle, to not find a way to make it publicly acceptable and condone that it's okay to have single-sex relationships. It's okay to have interracial relationships. We don't want to be accused, as we have been, of pandering to the pink vote, but you also don't want to lose your show. From a creative perspective, Tappert would describe another reason they never went all the way with the Xena and Gabrielle relationship, and that was to emphasize another romantic option for Xena. We didn't ever really want to get them 100% together for a very strange reason. There was Ares, Kevin Smith, God of War. We did not want to give up the hold that character had over Xena, so as much as we liked that Xena and Gabrielle were two people who were the best of friends, and perhaps intimate friends, we never wanted to give up Ares. While Xena and Gabrielle had several short-term love interests that fizzled out by the end of an episode, two men in Xena's life made a deep impression on her. Boreas, played by Martin Sokas, was Xena's partner while she was a warlord and the eventual father of Solon. We really only see him in flashbacks as he was killed before the series began, but there is an important connection between them. His turn towards being a good person preceded Xena's, and his death even inspired some introspection from her. Lucy Lawless reflected on the character of Boreas, saying,
"You know, Boreas, I think, was the one that got away. In a way, he was the one person who really loved her when she was so unlovable. And she just used him, abused him. I think he saw her potential. But in the end, she was far more of a warlord than he was. I mean, she was the real deal."
The man we see Xena most attracted to throughout the entire series is undoubtedly Ares, the god of war. As I mentioned earlier, nearly every moment between him and Xena seemed to be dripping with sexual tension. While Ares appears to be this dark, seductive force early on, as the series progresses we see Xena's influence over him grow, mirroring the decline in the influence the gods have over the lives of mortals that runs as a theme throughout the series. While in the early episodes, Xena seems to struggle with her attraction to Ares, by Season 5, in the episode Amphipolis Under Siege, we see her wrapping him around her finger. While she's always attracted to him, she sees him increasingly less like an imposing god, and more like a sad puppy pining after her.
Is there even a chance we could be together one day? I know, maybe 1 in 1,000?
Or like 1 in a billion.
So you're saying there is a chance?
Reflecting on the character in an interview, Kevin Smith said, "We always like to push Ares to see how much we can get away with." Charlie Sibbert says, "Let's just make him as weak and as vulnerable as we dare." So it was nice as an actor to be able to have that kind of latitude. But the reason he is nastier in Hercules, you see, is he has an emotional attachment to Xena. Whereas with Hercules, it is just plain out and out that he hates the guy. With Xena, he really wants to win her back. Sexuality is a complicated thing in this series. Xena and Gabrielle could easily be considered lovers, and so could Xena and Ares. Perhaps the lesson to learn here is to accept sexuality between adults in its many permutations, unless the person you're also into happens to be the god of war who wants you to lead an army that will slaughter thousands. While reading comments from the creative team behind the series on the subject, I noticed how cagey they were, particularly while the show was airing. There's this line constantly being walked because of the assumption that America simply wasn't ready to have 2 women in an openly gay relationship traveling the world and fighting giant monsters. In the context of the series, their relationship would have made perfect sense, but it could never be made explicit because of fear from audiences of the time. Producer Liz Friedman, who happens to be gay herself, summarized it saying, "The only thing that was important to me when I was involved with the show was not to jump in with both feet and make a statement about it. I think pre-Will and Grace and Ellen, that was sort of the way television tended to deal with gay relationships. You'd make the joke or you'd play the real intimacy between 2 women and then say, but they're straight, okay? To me, it was much more subversive and also something we could actually achieve, just not by having them ever say one way or the other."
Give us what we want! Deliver a new season, a 7th season of Xena!
Xena Warrior Princess debuted to strong ratings, climbing into the top 10 for syndicated TV shows, and at its height, reaching nearly 8 million people in the United States. It would eventually air in 105 different countries. Rob Tappert reflected on how he determined success early on. In terms of knowing when it was successful, I guess when we got the 2nd season order, and at that time, our goal had been to have Hercules and Xena beat Deep Space Nine and to beat Baywatch, which were the other shows in syndication at the time. Could we ever catch them? That was the yardstick we used to gauge how the show was doing. By the show's 2nd season, there were weeks where it was the #1 show in syndication, pulling ahead of both Baywatch and Star Trek. In addition to being a strong performer in the ratings, it also benefited from being one of the first online fandoms. The internet was very much a new thing to the broader public in the 90s, and it allowed Xena fans to organize online. Soon there were conventions, fan magazines, and other audience-driven initiatives that celebrated all things Xena. The popularity of Xena led to the shared universe she had with Hercules being called the Xenaverse, as probably the biggest indicator of Xena overtaking the show it was spun off of. The show itself had fun with its fan base too, particularly in the season 6 episode Soul Possession, which takes place in the modern day. Only this is a world where Xena existed in history and is also a TV show, based on the scrolls written by Gabrielle about her adventures with Xena. There's even a mention of Whoosh, arguably the most popular fanzine of the series.
Binder from Whoosh. As webmaster of the official Xena fan site, I happen to know Xena would never subscribe to the subjugating regime of marriage.
Whoosh, by the way, takes its name from the sound effect that plays when something very quickly moves, like a head turning around to look at something, which was a stylistic quirk that the series became known for.
How much she misses Xena!
Are you quite finished?
Probably the biggest fan contribution to the series came from Melissa Good, who went from writing Xena fanfic to writing for the show itself in its 6th season. While her career as a professional writer probably gave her some help in that department, her love of Xena undoubtedly helped too. Rob Tappert described her saying, "I'll tell you why I like working with Missy Good. She loves Xena and Gabrielle. That's invaluable to me. If I had my druthers, I'd have Missy write 2 more scripts, but I'll take what I can get and have her write 1 more." One of the real treats about having such a perpetually online fan base is that much of the history still exists on a handful of websites that have preserved these moments. There's something charming about finding old video clips encoded for Real Player that highlight early interviews Lucy Lawless had when she first got the role of Xena, even if they all look like this.
Thought I was a warrior, still I failed somehow.
Xena did a fair bit of adventuring outside the confines of her show. The first obvious place for her to visit was in the show she spun off from. Although Xena Warrior Princess and Hercules the Legendary Journeys ran back to back, there were only a few crossovers between the two when the star characters would appear on each other's show, such as when Hercules marries the Golden Hind Serena, Xena and Gabrielle show up and back up their friend when things get a bit heated. Other appearances weren't precisely crossovers so much as it was Lucy Lawless or Renee O'Connor playing alternate versions of their characters, like when Aeolus visits an alternate reality in the episode Armageddon Now, Part 2.
I'm not the only one. We can't break our spirit.
The cure for spirit is fear.
Perhaps the biggest connection between the two shows is the Dayhawk story arc. While it started out in an episode of Xena, it was resolved in an episode of Hercules, where Hercules defeats the evil god for good. As part of that story arc, Gabrielle's daughter Hope and Callisto both made cameos on Hercules, including one strange plot twist where we find out a time-traveling Callisto is responsible for the death of her family. Callisto had also made an earlier guest appearance on Hercules when Hera has her mess with Hercules' friends on his birthday. Crossovers always felt slightly off, particularly in Hercules. In spite of a shared setting, the shows had very different tones, and the experience of the characters didn't mix very well. Hercules, in its 6th season, was abruptly cancelled, and so its final episode felt a bit sudden.
You know, before, did you mean it when you were talking about retiring?
Did I say that?
Yeah. I was there. You said it. You said, don't worry, after this one, I'm done.
Oh, right. Well, then I guess we're retired.
Hercules would need a bit more closure to his story, and he would later find that in an episode of Xena. Xena and Hercules have always had an interesting contrast. Producer Liz Friedman described it saying,
Hercules is the hero that you hope is out there, and Xena's the hero that you hope is in here.
Hercules is literally more than human, being a demigod, and while he's made mistakes, he's pretty much been a swell guy for most of his life. Xena's mortality and past failures differentiate her from Hercules in that she lets the audience know that there's a path towards redemption and that there will be mistakes along the way, that you don't have to be defined by your worst moments. There's room for both heroes, of course, but it's not surprising that Xena ultimately ended up being more popular. She tells a story that's far more relatable and human. While people might wish they could be as great as Hercules, the truth is it's a lot easier to identify with someone like Xena, who is far more imperfect. Another piece of Xena-related media I need to highlight is the animated feature, Hercules and Xena, The Battle for Mount Olympus. This story is more or less outside the regular continuity of the Hercules and Xena TV shows, though it does feature a lot of the voices from the cast. There are a few musical numbers of a certain quality, and the animation looks like what you're seeing on the screen. While it might have been a bit of fun for kids, this one seems like perhaps not the best use of the popularity of these two shows. Xena's popularity extended to so many other products, including novels, picture books, trading cards, model chakrams, soundtrack CDs, interactive CD-ROMs, and several video games. In fact, I played a few of those games while working on this video, including finishing the PlayStation one. It was certainly an experience, and this is me you see playing the game in this footage, and the controls are not what you would expect. Perhaps the biggest accomplishment for Xena outside of her series was to have a dwarf planet in our solar system named after her, and the moon that orbited that planet was named, of course, Gabrielle. But alas, there are rules for naming planets, and this would never be its official name. Currently, the planet goes by the name Eris.
You half-witted toady to a third-rate god, come and get me!
Xena Warrior Princess was very much concerned with the Greek gods, but that wasn't the only spiritual playground it stepped into throughout its run. One of the early examples was Xena's run-ins with biblical stories. In The Royal Couple of Thieves, she has to save the Ark of the Covenant.
Thou shalt not covet, thou shalt not steal. Who can live by those laws?
In the episodes Altered States and The Giant Killer, Xena finds herself in the middle of biblical stories, the story of Abraham nearly sacrificing his son and David fighting Goliath, respectively. And A Solstice Carol is a Christmas-themed episode, right down to the solstice tree, Syndicades, and a cameo by a certain newborn.
May God smile on you always for your kindness.
Although we would see more strikingly biblically themed episodes later on, in the early seasons it was more or less another space for Xena and Gabrielle to have some adventures in. The show took a similar approach to historical events, such as expanding on Xena's backstory in the Season 2 episode Destiny. In her past, Xena apparently spent some time as a pirate and captured a young Julius Caesar.
What's your name?
Caesar. Julius Caesar.
Caesar, Julius Caesar.
This was based on a real historical event, and it certainly wouldn't be the only time Xena would figure into Roman history. You might be tempted to try and use this historical marker to place Xena's story somewhere on the timeline of history, but the show has a very relaxed attitude towards timelines in general. According to R.J. Stewart, basically we have this rule that everything has to be BC, a rule that is as inflexible as a rubber band, by the way. By season 4, there was a change in posture to religion and history on the show, and the two would become fertile grounds for a much longer story arc that ran through the season. At this point in the story, Xena had just seen Gabrielle and Hope fall into a pit of lava, and she believes them dead. As I described earlier, they do come back later, but Xena doesn't know that yet. The 4th season opens with a 2-parter where Xena goes on a journey to bring Gabrielle back to life, bringing her to a tribe of Amazons that have a shaman-centric culture. It's here that Xena runs into Alti, played by Claire Stansfield, who would vex her in several episodes in the seasons to come. The 2-parter is about Xena rescuing the souls of dead Amazons from Alti, but most importantly, it ends with her having a vision of the future where she and Gabrielle are being crucified by the Romans. The rest of season 4 would focus on Gabrielle's spiritual journey and Xena's growing anxiety over her vision of their deaths.
Gabrielle, having had a very, very close brush with death when she went into the pit, and then she says that she was in a hospice for a while, so obviously she's had a long time to recover and to consider things, and she's realized that she doesn't know exactly what she wants.
About halfway through season 4, Xena and Gabrielle head to India. The first of these 3 India episodes introduced Eli, played by Timothy Omenson. Although he seems to be a street magician, we later find out he has a special healing power, and he performs an exorcism on Gabrielle. If Eli makes you think of Jesus Christ, that's not an accident, Rob Tappert explains.
When we decided to portray Eli, one, we were incredibly concerned that the religious right would come after us. And we had originally called him Issa, I-S-S-A, which was supposedly the historical name of Jesus who went to India. So we went, all right, Eli's a very veiled name for that.
Tim Omenson described how he was cast in an interview saying, "Ted Raimi called me one day and said, you need to get your agent on this project. They're looking for a guy, essentially, a guy who looks like Jesus." And I'd always had the long hair and a goatee, and I went in and read for it, and Ted sort of, said he's a good guy, you should hire him. And I got the job. Eli would appear in several episodes throughout the series, and anyone familiar with Jesus' story might be able to guess where this is all going, though Xena Warrior Princess certainly took a different stab at the story. What I should note here is that Eli is not presented the same way the Greek gods are. Although he is something of a trickster and perhaps not to be trusted when we first meet him, when he turns more towards the divine and starts to represent a higher power, he has this very saintly attitude. The very petty and self-serving Greek gods stand in stark contrast to the very pious and wise Eli. The next India episode, Between the Lines, featured the return of Alti and an important haircut for Gabrielle.
You know it was like this in that vision.
I know.
The change in hair is meant to symbolize Gabrielle's growth. Rob Tappert said in an interview, "It was a way of making her, since she was on this journey to go from a young girl to an adult. We thought that this was an outward symbol of it." Most controversial was the 3rd episode of the India trilogy titled The Way. In this one, Eli and Gabrielle are captured by Indrajit, played by Rajneil Singh, so Xena has to team up with Hanuman, played by Jack McKinnon, to rescue them, with the help of Krishna, played by Rajiv Varma. I should note that if these Hindu figures were swapped out with Greek ones, this would be like most other episodes of Xena, but there's a difference between using ancient mythology and a religion still being practiced today. This episode caused an uproar within a Hindu group that felt it was disrespectful towards the religion. A letter from Tusta Krishna Das took offense that Krishna was presented in a fictionalized way, in the same way Greek gods had been in previous episodes in the series. The statement concluded, "So long as Krishna is portrayed in any fictional capacity, it is offensive and should not be tolerated." Similarly, they took offense to the portrayal of Hanuman, the Vedic scriptures, and the tacit approval of Xena and Gabrielle's lesbian relationship. There were a variety of responses from the creative team behind Xena.
I have talked to many Hindus from India who really liked the episode, so that a relatively small group of American Hindus, people from a Western culture who have converted to Hinduism, were offended by it. It's very unfortunate, and I don't think you can make light of it, but I thought we dealt with it in a very respectful way.
This guy started a very effective campaign. Turns out he had a brain tumour. He's a white guy from New Zealand, living down the bottom of New Zealand, just being a pain in the ass. Finding something to get upset about. But brain tumours will do that to some people, so...
Rob Tappert said in an interview, eventually the Indian ambassador to the United States called the head of Universal and said, "You guys got to do something." And there were big protests. When this episode was re-aired, it notably included some additional messages, a disclaimer in the opening, and a short clip at the end.
But an even more important goal is to enlighten people of other faiths about Hinduism.
With understanding comes tolerance.
If you would like to learn more about this great religion, please visit your local library or internet website.
According to Rob Tappert, they also had to take out a brief image of Xena headbutting Hanuman. As a point of contrast, there were Hindu groups that saw the episode positively. A section from Xena Warrior Princess, the complete illustrated companion, reads, "Hinduism Today, a U.S. monthly magazine, also reported on The Way and the attendant controversy in its regular television column in the June 1999 issue. The column reports the opinions of several of the magazine's regular correspondents from different parts of the country. All give favorable reviews, finding that Krishna is portrayed with love and reverence, that he is treated with respect even by Xena, who doesn't like gods, and that it is obvious the producers made an effort to research Hinduism." Says one correspondent, "It conveyed the philosophy of nonviolence and love very well. It brought Hindu ideas into the mainstream, reaching an audience that might not be exposed otherwise." The column concludes by quoting Dr. Ravi Palat of Auckland University, a consultant for the episode, who is puzzled by the protest because, as he observes, the Indian film industry has made hundreds of movies portraying Hindu deities as fictional characters. What often gets lost in all the controversy that swirls around this episode is an important development for both Eli and Gabrielle. Eli embraces a quest for peace through nonviolence.
If someone were to walk up to you and knock you down,
Then I'd get up.
but if they knocked you down again,
Then I'd get up again, if I could. But under no circumstances would I fight back. If I did, I would simply be perpetuating the cycle of violence that has ravaged the earth for centuries.
And Gabrielle decides to walk the same path. Xena and now pacifist Gabrielle head to Rome, soon finding themselves embroiled in the civil war between Caesar and Pompey. In the episode titled The Ides of March, we learn that it isn't just Caesar Xena has to worry about.
I wanted to cease existing, and you did your best to help. But as you can see, it didn't take. They wouldn't let me off the hook that easy.
who's they?
I don't know. Whoever it is who does the final judging. They sent me to a place that makes Tartarus look like the Elysian Fields. They call it hell.
Callisto, being too bad for Tartarus, is instead sent to hell, which is an interesting twist. It's another implication of a sort of hierarchy in the spiritual world. It signals that the Christian world emerging in this period is supplanting the older world of Greek mythology, something that would become more apparent in the next season. For the time being, Callisto's presence in hell is a marker of that grander narrative to come. In the mortal world, Xena helps set in motion Caesar's eventual assassination, but her attempt to escape is thwarted by Callisto. To protect Xena, Gabrielle gives up her vow of pacifism and kills a bunch of guys. What's interesting here is that Gabrielle in this moment is acting a lot more like Xena. Instead of trying to adhere to some grander moral code, it becomes more squishy and relative once she realizes that upholding that code means the death of Xena. There seems to be a statement here about what it means to hold on to any sort of higher moral code of being, and Eli's way of peace through pacifism is presented as an almost unreachable ideal. The episode ends with the prophesized crucifixions happening alongside the assassination of Caesar, with Xena and Gabrielle dying. Not only was that not the end of the series, the season would flash forward in the next episode with a fun story set in the present day, but it would be months before this cliffhanger would be resolved in Season 5. One interesting thing to note here is that Xena seems to ascend to heaven with Gabrielle at the end. To me, this implied the end of her journey of redemption, because if it's good enough for God in this world, it should be good enough for the audience. The series would see it otherwise, though, and in a way it reinforces this idea that no God has the final say on morality. That's reinforced with how Greek and Hindu traditions also seem to be just as real in this world, and there are more gods to come in future episodes. This is a world where every spiritual practice has some tangible existence in the world, each of them vying for the attention of us mere mortals. Season 5 of Xena had two major challenges. The first obvious one was having a way to bring back the stars of the show who died last season. The next challenge was dealing with the fact that Lucy Lawless was pregnant. The answer to both those problems lay in the opening episode Fallen Angel, where Xena and Gabrielle find themselves in the middle of a war between angels and demons, with Callisto on the side of hell.
I promised to deliver you to my lord, and that's exactly what I'm gonna do.
As you might expect, Xena and Gabrielle eventually pull through and are resurrected, but not before cleansing Callisto of her evil, turning her into an angel. As the episode ends, Callisto leaves Xena with a gift, a pregnancy, that Xena learns about several episodes later. While Rob Tappert said this show isn't trying to push Christianity in particular, there is this repeated reverence for it that comes across more strongly than other religious traditions that appear in the series. It could be understood as a product of being in this particular moment in history, which happens to coincide with the ascendance of Christianity, rather than an inherent preference for one religion over the other. Later seasons would validate that with far less flattering depictions of angels and other figures. But in this moment, in this episode, it's hard not to get the impression that nascent Christianity is a purer faith than the others we've seen so far. Sensing Eli will bring about the end of the gods, Ares decides to kill him. His death signifies the next major section of the series, the Twilight of the Gods.
If we are joined in peace and friendship, then we have no need of the gods.
Much like Xena herself, the Twilight of the Gods story arc began with Hercules. After Hercules the Legendary Journeys was cancelled, Hercules' story would be completed a few months later in an episode of Xena called God-Fearing Child. This one felt a little strange, as Xena and Hercules had plot lines that ran in parallel but didn't intersect too much, except for the beginning and end. Xena is about to give birth to her child, while Hercules is trying to protect this soon-to-be-born baby from Zeus, because Zeus believes the child's birth will bring about the end of the gods.
Who sent you? Zeus has decreed it. Decreed what? The unborn child of Xena must die.
While Xena goes on a trip to the underworld to find Hades' helmet of invisibility and save Solon, who's trapped in Tartarus, Hercules confronts Zeus, eventually killing him. Meanwhile, Xena gives birth to her child, a little girl who Solon has named Eve. Hercules' story ends as a much longer storyline that saw the time of the gods come to a close. It highlights the difference between the two shows and how, in a sense, they reflect two different eras. Hercules is in the old world of the gods, where Xena is about moving on to a new era as the old one begins to fade away. As you might expect, with the prophecy of the Twilight of the Gods being upon them, the Olympians don't take this line down and they vow to kill Eve. To protect Eve, Xena hides her with the eventual Roman Emperor Augustus, figuring the gods won't look for her there. Meanwhile, Xena and Gabrielle fake their deaths using a special elixir to trick the gods into thinking that the crisis is past. Ares, who doesn't know this is a plot, takes their bodies and puts them in ice coffins, where they're trapped, only to wake up 25 years later. A few things have changed in the future. Joxer is an old man, and he has a son, Virgil, played by William Gregory Lee. Argo has sadly passed away, though she did have a child, Argo too. And Eve, played by Adrienne Wilkinson, is now a champion for Rome, going by Livia. She is very much a villain now, and even kills Joxer. One of the big changes of this world 25 years later is the founding of a new religion whose adherents call themselves the followers of Eli, which is pretty much Christianity without being explicit about it. Livia has been persecuting these early Christians as an agent for Rome. Unlike Xena, who learned the error of her ways through a series of hardships, eventually convinced by Hercules to do good, another type of divine intervention convinces Eve to change her path.
What have I done?
Xena Warrior Princess did a great job of showing how the conflict between good and evil was sown within Xena from her interactions with Lao Ma, Caesar, Boreas, and other figures who pulled her in different directions. And it's far more compelling than Eve's journey. We meet her where we met Xena when she first showed up, but Eve's conversion is so immediate it feels cheap in comparison. We only learn bits and pieces of her history, and unlike Xena, who struggled to do good in the early seasons, Eve is quite pious and a firm believer in Eli's teachings after a brief exposure to his light. It all feels too easy, at least from her own personal journey. Eve's immediate reformation also alerts her presence to the Greek gods, who arrive in the season 5 finale, Motherhood. Eli grants Xena the power to kill gods. And this episode features Xena taking down the entire Greek pantheon, aside from Ares and Aphrodite, played by Alexandra Tidings.
No, I just want to help.
Xena battles the gods throughout most of the episode, but there's this moment in particular that sparks some controversy. Gabrielle, who's been driven mad by the Furies, tries to kill Eve, and Xena, seeing her daughter in danger, throws her chakram at Gabrielle. Considering the bond Xena and Gabrielle have, it seems cold-blooded for Xena to nearly kill her friend like that. Director Rick Jacobson explained.
I always thought, well, of course Xena wouldn't do it. I mean, I always interpreted it was the work of the Furies. It's that whole, caught up in the moment. I mean, it's one of those things that you do, and as soon as you do, you regret.
Honestly, though, I think Adrienne Wilkinson's explanation makes enough sense for me.
It's a mother's instinct, I think, and you can't fault her for that. That if you see that your daughter is about to die, it's not a choice of killing one person or another. It's that mother's instinct of just saving something that she had only recently found.
The episode ends with Xena killing Athena and officially bringing the reign of the Olympians to an end. This conclusion has some finality to one of the major themes of Xena Warrior Princess. Xena's personal journey of redemption took her from finding personal salvation to literally overthrowing the dominant power structure in her world, in part because the warlord she was a product of that power structure, being a pawn of Ares. While it's ironic that Ares is one of the only gods to survive the Twilight, he's only able to do that by giving up his divinity, which he sacrifices during Xena's fight with Athena to keep Gabrielle and Hope alive. Hope being alive is what allows Xena to kill Athena, because her life is tied to Xena's god-killing powers. The end of the time of the Greek gods is an interesting concept, though it's not quite as liberatory as that action would suggest, as it's being supplanted by Christianity. And in a way, Xena being granted the power to kill gods through Eli presents her as someone moving from being a pawn of one god to another. In an interview, Rob Tappert said, "We were aware as we were doing this of the end result, but we never intended consciously for Xena to become some messenger for other gods. She was there at the crossroads of those different aspects of different stories. I find it interesting when people think we have gone out of our way to promote Christianity, and I see it differently. There's nothing wrong with love your neighbor, but I thought by the end of the Heart of Darkness story, as far as the archangels go, we showed that something was rotten." In addition to Heart of Darkness, The God You Know showed us a side of the archangel Michael, played by Charles Measure, as a manipulative force. After he tries to manipulate Xena, she tries to kill him, and Eli takes away her power to kill the gods. It goes some way to complicate the otherwise pro-Christian messaging of the series and helps to disentangle Xena's quest from it. Xena didn't seek this power herself. Rather, she lives at the behest of beings above her, and in that sense we can empathize with her as she bucks against their control, and acquiescing when it becomes a necessity. She's using whatever means she has to carve out a life for herself in a world defined by gods. Even without that episode, it could be argued that Xena Warrior Princess presents the arrival of Christianity as something like a mob takeover. They preach love and peace, but when it comes right down to it, they had to get Xena to do their dirty work of wiping out the Greek gods, so their territory could be moved on. The disconnect here, I think, just comes from the tone of how the story is told rather than the plot itself. Eli is so much more respectable than any of the Greek gods, and when he does turn on Xena, there's no figure to really engage with, just a light passing judgment. And the music for anything Christian, while certainly within tradition for devotional music, has a reverent quality to it. I think it reflects a bias, whether conscious or unconscious, toward Christianity. One that the show at least has the sense to struggle and try to undermine, even if it doesn't quite get there as effectively as it does for other religious traditions. Before shooting began on the 6th season, creator Rob Tappert learned that it would be the last one for the series. With no Greek gods to mess with, Xena instead finds herself at odds with the Norse gods for a trio of episodes. While Hercules was the first to visit the Norse lands, Xena has an adventure that also includes Beowulf and his battle with Grendel. We learn that Xena was once a Valkyrie and is inadvertently responsible for the creation of Grendel. The story includes another jump forward in time, just a single year in this instance, and is very notable for how Xena wakes up a sleeping Gabrielle who had been trapped in a ring of fire. These episodes seem to exist to cement in the minds of the audience that Xena isn't just a great warrior, but one of the greatest of all time, especially when Beowulf, the classic hero archetype, gives her his seal of approval.
Legends didn't lie, Xena. You are the greatest warrior I've ever known.
Before moving on to the finale, one episode I want to highlight is Path of Vengeance. In it, Eve is captured by the Amazons and condemned for enslaving them when she was fighting for Rome as Livia. Xena eventually saves her daughter's life, and Eve is sent on a voyage to Chin to spread the word of Eli. But there was an interesting fact shared in the audio commentary for this episode by its writer, Joel Metzger.
For the Path of Vengeance, I think the story they wanted to tell was a lot of it was in the context of the American Indians, in that the Amazons sort of represented what the white man did to the American Indians.
This was something done for the Amazons in general throughout the series. Different groups of Amazons were called tribes for a reason, and in the Adventures of the Sin Trade, we see a very clear evocation of a shamanic tradition, which is often associated with indigenous cultures. I'm honestly not entirely sure how to come to grips with taking real historical customs and peoples and giving them to fictional ones, especially since the series otherwise has shown no qualms about traipsing into other traditions. Although much of it was done with respect and without the desire to offend, there's something strange about spiritual practices being used as storytelling tools so loosely that, in the case of indigenous cultures, their practices and stories can be taken without any real acknowledgement in the episodes themselves. Conversely, the ancient Greek gods got to remain Greek, and various other deities and spiritual practices had a much closer tie to their cultural traditions. While it's hard to trace where all these individual traditions come from, and they certainly all weren't from the Americas, the sort of nebulous way in which it's handled, I think decouples them from the people who birthed these traditions in a way that's unfortunate.
I hear they're in need of a girl with a chakra.
The Xena Warrior Princess finale, A Friend in Need, aired in 2 parts in June of 2001. Xena is summoned by a friend named Akemi, played by Michelle Ong, bringing Xena and Gabrielle to the other side of the world, to the kingdom of Joppa, obviously meant to be Japan. This highlights another part of Xena's past where she went to Joppa and was responsible for the deaths of 40,000 people when she accidentally burned down an entire city. Now a demon named Yodoshi, played by Adrian Brown, possesses these souls, and Xena needs to free them. One part of this finale that really stuck out to me is how Xena seems to be giving Gabrielle lessons to take her place, almost as if Xena had been training Gabrielle for this role the whole time. Xena also finally teaches Gabrielle how to do the pinch.
If I only had 30 seconds to live, this is how I'd want to live them. Looking into your eyes, always remember, I love you.
Xena intentionally dies while fighting a massive army so her spirit can fight Yodoshi. As she fights the demon, Gabrielle races to the top of Mount Fuji for a special water meant to bring Xena back to life. At first, Gabrielle uses the water to give Xena's spirit some extra strength. After Xena wins, Gabrielle tries to put Xena's ashes in the fountain to bring her back, but she's stopped.
The sun is setting. I have to bring you back to life.
No. Not if it means condemning the souls of the 40,000 who burned at Ikuchi. But if there is a reason for our travels together, it's because I had to learn from you. Enough to know the final, the good, the right thing to do.
As Gabrielle holds on to Xena's ashes, her spirit stands by her side in the chakram.
So where to now? I think we should go south to the land of the pharaohs. I hear they need a girl with the chakra.
Where you go, I'm at your side.
It was a powerful finale, and one that concluded Xena's journey for redemption. For all the good she did, including enough to get her into heaven, it apparently wasn't a done deal until she atoned for this particular crime. Although thematically it was certainly a culmination of the whole series, the plot itself really comes out of nowhere. Aside from one character in an episode earlier in that season mentioning Joppa, there wasn't a whole lot that foreshadowed this adventure. Rob Tappert explained the creative choice, saying, "One of the reasons we decided to take Xena to Japan for the series finale was both RJ Stewart and myself are huge fans of Hong Kong pictures, and this was somewhat our tribute to Chinese Ghost Story, which in itself was a tribute to Evil Dead 2. So I felt it came full circle, and we'd always talked about going to Japan, and then it just seemed like the right thing to do for this finale." The reaction from fans was quite heated. The reasons are numerous, and many essays and letters have been written from viewers who are upset that Xena died, and that her relationship with Gabrielle was never fulfilled. Lucy Lawless spoke about the ending, saying, "Xena's death is a huge regret on my part because we didn't realize really what it meant to people. We thought, oh, that's a really strong ending. Now I just say to fans, let's pretend that never happened." Renee O'Connor took a different angle, saying, "People actually hate that I love the ending. I understand no one wanted to see Xena die. They felt extremely betrayed by the show to see her die." Rob Tappert stands by his decision with the ending, saying, We had long conversations about this, RJ and I, and we thought Xena was guilty and it wasn't about separating Xena and Gabrielle. But the funny thing was we probably underestimated the backlash. We thought it was the right thing for a character who had come from such a violent and lawless past. So that's why we did it. There was a bit of selfishness perhaps in closing that door thoroughly. A director's cut of the finale would be released in 2002 that included some additional footage, including a key moment that better explained why Xena chose to stay dead at the end of the episode.
I have to tell you what must be done to save those souls. But I feel my own soul is doomed for what I'm about to tell you.
The shot of Gabrielle standing alone on the boat was also removed.
Her courage will change the world.
One of the recurring elements of Xena Warrior Princess was placing Xena into events she was never considered a part of. It can be as simple as giving her an important line.
Beware Greeks bearing gifts, Paris.
And she's often instrumental, like the time she helped David beat Goliath, or helped Ulysses string his bow. In some cases, she's not inserted into a story so much as she's clearly shown as superior to some mythological figure. One example is when she literally pulls the fabled sword out of the stone.
Nice blade.
Did you?
There are so many other examples in this series, including ones I highlighted earlier in this video, but I think they're more than just cute references for people to laugh at. There was a comment by producer Stephen L. Sears that partially captures one of the aspects of Xena I find most fascinating when considering how Xena fits into our understanding of mythology and ancient history. He said, "Here's the way we rationalize it. First, Xena was a dark character, and few people want to write about a dark character, so her participation in certain events would have been omitted by the ancients. Second, the authorities on mythology disagree among themselves. The Roman poet Ovid disagrees with Plato, who disagrees with compilers of Greek tales Robert Graves and Edith Hamilton. Also, Xena was a woman. Most of the histories were written by men. That last part in particular is what I want to hone in on, how the contributions of women aren't included in history or in mythology. Xena Warrior Princess isn't correcting the mythological record, but rather providing an alternative take on it. The stories of Xena are just as real as any other mythology, only created in a time and place where women have more power in society. Going back to the very first Hercules movie, we see a version of the Amazons that, while not perfect, at least acknowledges that women live in a society that treats them as second-class citizens.
My father used to chase my mother with one of these. No one chases me.
Ultimately, what mythology tells us is how we understand ourselves as people in the present, and to create a fictional character in Greek mythology and see her be latched on so dearly, I think represents a need people have to see themselves in these classic stories that they typically didn't see in the past. And it reflects where society was in the 90s, wanting a mythology we recognized, but a mythology that recognized the changing world we lived in as well. The history side of the equation is a bit more complicated. For example, Xena being fictional almost certainly means she had nothing to do with the death of Julius Caesar. But this is a TV show, not a history program, and in this sense it should be understood metaphorically. As another example, in the second part of The Debt, we find out that it wasn't Lao Tzu who wrote the Tao Te Ching, but instead his wife, Lao Ma.
You write down all that wisdom stuff, huh?
Yes, in his book.
You give him credit for that, too.
This wisdom comes from heaven. What difference does it make who gets credit for it? Lao Ma or Lao Tzu?
It's a cute moment, and maybe there's some truth to anyone who may have contributed to the Tao Te Ching during its writing that we'll never know. But it's not the specifics that matter so much as the sentiment here. History, written by men, was largely focused on the accomplishments of other men. This statement is not about the facts of the historical record, but rather acknowledging the context in which it was written, and therefore what we might be missing in that historical record. Making Gabrielle a bard is a cheeky way of understanding that men are the ones who are responsible for writing the stories of other men. Gabrielle's scrolls about Xena's adventures come out many times throughout the series, in part to show us the artistic and cerebral side of Gabrielle, but also to remind the audience that Xena's exploits deserve to be written down, and it shouldn't be lost on the audience that the only person doing this is another woman. R.J. Stewart jokingly came to the same conclusion in one of the DVD commentaries.
We were correcting the impression that centuries of sexism has created by taking the credit away from Xena and giving it to all these pretender males.
Xena's journey of redemption can be seen as a vindication for the role of women in mythology and ancient history. Xena was very much a product of circumstance, seduced by Ares into becoming a warlord, much in the way women throughout history have been made subservient by powerful men. So Xena's quest to redeem herself is her journey to find personal value and to change the world for the better. And in that process, she presents a woman with the power to make her own mark on the stories we tell today. It's a rejection in part of the orthodoxy that subjugates women, while still acknowledging and appreciating other parts of that rich mythological tradition.
I'll always be with you, Gabrielle.
Following the end of Xena Warrior Princess, Lucy Lawless would appear in Battlestar Galactica, Spartacus, and Ash vs. Evil Dead. She is currently starring in the series My Life is Murder, which is in production for its 4th season. In 2023, she co-wrote and directed her first movie, Never Look Away. She's also been involved in numerous activist causes, perhaps most notably being arrested in 2012 as part of a Greenpeace operation to board and occupy an oil drilling ship that was headed to the Arctic. Renee O'Connor started a film production company, Rock Productions, in 2001. She wrote, directed, and starred in the movie Diamonds and Guns, and has directed other movies including Broken Things and Are You Kidding Me? She's also continued to act, appearing in A Question of Faith, Beyond the Farthest Star, and Arc. She also had a guest spot in an episode of My Life is Murder, where she got to perform alongside Lucy Lawless once again. Although in this part of the video, I usually only focus on the principal cast, I do want to acknowledge Kevin Smith, who tragically passed away in 2002 after a fall from several stories up on a film set in China. In an interview that was published after his passing, he described his final day of filming for Xena Warrior Princess, saying, "Xena stands still. Ares walks around her. They kiss, and then he says, 'Call me.' As we walk back to the trailers, Luce said, 'That's the last scene that we'll ever do, isn't it?' And I thought, this is the last time I'll ever wear my Ares costume. That was when it really got to me. Yeah, those boots were a drag to put on, but I looked at that costume hanging there and I thought, man, I've spent 6 years in that, and I'll never again." It was weird. It was so emotionally resonant for me. Since the end of Xena Warrior Princess, there has been constant talk about some kind of reboot or revival of the series, though so far nothing concrete has been announced. In an interview in October of 2024, Lucy Lawless discussed how attempts to bring the series back have kept falling apart for various reasons late in the process, but considering the enduring love for the series, there is still the possibility it might come back in some fashion in the future. Xena Warrior Princess still has a strong following 30 years later. In fact, there are still Xena conventions celebrating the show in 2025. In a 2016 interview, Lucy Lawless said, "The world's still crying out for a hero. There are still people who feel marginalized. There are still people who want honor and equality. And that's what this show is about." I want to take a moment to acknowledge the immense help I got from the archives for Whoosh and the That's Entertainment blog, who included so many old materials about the show, including interviews and articles and other sources of information. If not for these incredibly loyal Xena fans, I don't know if I would have been able to find half the material I did for this video, and I am very grateful for their efforts in preserving it. In many ways, it felt like this video was a long time coming. I remember watching Xena and thinking it was just so cool and fun, and being able to see it all again all these years later has been a great experience for me. A real trip down memory lane, even though I didn't get a chance to see the finale when it first aired. And it's awesome that people still love it and remember it so many years later. If there's anything about this video you think might be loved and remembered in the future, perhaps you'd like to contribute to making more of these in the future by joining my Patreon or becoming a channel member. You'll get your name in the credits like all these fine folks here, early access to videos, and some fun bonuses I throw in every now and again. If you'd like to support this video in a non-monetary fashion, you can like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, or share this video on social media. Thank you all so much for watching.